An important event was happening in a grand skyscraper with many guests, and there were many journalists all gathered for the award for the greatest entrepreneur of Korea. The presenter announced the participants. The heroine of the night was a successful businesswoman who earned an income of $100 million in 2017. She helped elevate Korea's reputation in the world. A slender and elegant woman entered wearing a red model dress. The presenter called this successful businesswoman the young talent of the financial world. The woman acted confidently. She was young and beautiful. Her name was Sanva. She was the CEO of Sanva Industries. The South Korean media detailed Lady U.S. Sanga's past business presentation. Her photo was on almost every cover of the major publications, from newspapers to magazines. People knew about the successful businesswoman and her financial achievements. The lady was taking a bath in her apartment after work. She had a young and beautiful body. The businesswoman took care of herself and kept fit. She was resting after her bath, recovering from a hard day. Her personal secretary approached her and praised her boss for performing so well today. The supervisor called the secretary by the name Mingi. Tiredly, the girl informed the supervisor that she had an acupuncture session in 20 minutes. Sitting still, the lady indicated that she was aware of this. The secretary continued speaking happily. She congratulated her boss for reaching the 100 million W mark in sales. The girl added that she was extremely excited at the moment. Somehow, the businesswoman said distantly that all the money she earned was just numbers. The secretary froze in perplexity with a tired look. The woman said that there is no difference between 10 million or 100 million W. They are just numbers that disappear as soon as someone achieves them. She instructively said that the really important thing is the ability to bounce back no matter what difficult situation a person finds themselves in. The secretary expressed total agreement with her superior. The girl continued praising the lady. She had always been close to the boss and knew her very well. The lady could understand the highest degree of thought and strength. Nothing and no one threw her off the right path. The saleswoman recalled that she had already planned to reach the maximum sales volume at the time. She had planned an amount of 100 million W. She had risked a lot to achieve this. The secretary timidly asked what her boss had sacrificed. The lady replied that she had forfeited her right to repay some. The secretary timidly repeated the words she had just heard from her boss. The supervisor asked the secretary to schedule a board meeting for tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. At the appointed time, the meeting was held. The board of directors was gathered in a grand skyscraper. The directors were surprised by the president's decision to step aside for 6 months at a difficult time for the company. The lady and the board members were seated around a large table. Several directors told the president that to increase sales, the management of the company should be united under her charisma. They didn't understand how she could step away in such a difficult moment. She said she fully understood that her request had been a surprise to someone on the council. The president reiterated that she would personally overcome the challenge no matter what aspect it took. She confirmed she would do so on behalf of sophistication. She said she couldn't give the reason for her action and didn't expect the council to understand. There was complete silence at the table for a short while, and then there were sudden angry reactions from several leaders towards the lady. The president said he couldn't give a reason for her action and didn't expect the council to understand. She stood up and asked permission to fulfill her request. The president asked for just months of freedom and no more. After the meeting, the excited participants began to disperse. They certainly couldn't perceive what had just happened and what the president was thinking. Some of the directors didn't understand why their supervisor would show such weakness by making an unreasonable request. It would worsen the company's image. One of these directors realized that the lady herself had voluntarily shown weakness. He thought the council could take advantage of this. The current situation could be a good opportunity for the council members to remove the supervisor who had been nicknamed the Ghost. Oh, Sanva was at home. She was resting after the last board meeting. In the midst of depression and apathy, the lady with heavy sadness sat on the floor with her back against the wall. Once again, she examined various documents without much attention. It was very hard for the president of the council to focus on anything. The woman was having a tough time amidst mood swings. She was lonely, despite being young and beautiful. As she contemplated the reality around her with a vacant look, she wondered about the meaning of continuing to live when allowed to die. While the TV played in the background, the woman heard the main characters in one of the movies talking about parties with their lives. The girl turned quickly, interested in the words she heard on TV. It was surprising for the woman that the TV was broadcasting, even though she was lost in thought. She concluded that most people die alone. The lady reached the point that everything starts when a person thinks it's the end, and that's when the opportunity arises to start a new life with a blank slate. Speaking to herself, the woman concluded that true strength lies not in the ability to never fall, but in the ability to rise again and again. No matter what happens, her depressing thoughts made the woman cry. She sat on the floor, practically disconnected from the reality around her. The TV continued playing, and then the woman heard the presenter say that the original author was Nanusho. The next day, The lady was driving to work, thinking about the information she heard on TV. She kept repeating the name Nan Kung Chu to herself. A secretary approached the lady and gave her a clip with specific information about CCH. The secretary said that Conchio won a manhwa contest when she was 17 years old. The work was called Cherry Blossom Season of Trembling Petals. The TV series was to be made, but the author Qin Shield disappeared and vanished without a trace. The girl informed the boss that Qin Shield no longer had successful works. He became a forgotten author who sporadically releases short thoughts. The man who sat beside him was a stranger, but he seemed to have something on his mind. Coin looked at him with curiosity. The stranger smiled and said he had heard about the author's difficulties. He offered a unique opportunity to Qin Shield, something that could change his life forever. Qin Shield was intrigued and asked what it was. The stranger revealed that he was looking for a talented writer for a special project, something that could take Coin to a new level of fame and success. He said he had heard about Qin's skills as a morning writer and believed he was the right person for the job. Coin was initially skeptical, but the stranger explained the project details and how he could make a lot of money with it. He said he needed a skilled writer to create a series of erotic and adult mornings for a male audience. The payment would be generous, and there was the possibility of additional bonuses based on sales performance. Although hesitant, Qin Shield accepted the offer. He thought this could be his chance to finally overcome his financial difficulties and achieve recognition as a writer. Quill began working on the new project with him. He created sensual characters and engaging plots, following the stranger's guidelines. The erotic scenes were meticulously drawn, and Qin Shield strove to make each frame as seductive as possible. The project was underway, and Qin Shield began to see the fruits of his hard work when sales started to increase. He received the promised payments, and for the first time in a long time, he managed to pay his bills on time. However, as time passed, he began to feel a void within himself. He realized he was compromising his artistic integrity in exchange for money and fame. What he was creating was no longer an expression of his creativity, but rather a product aimed at satisfying others' sensual desires. He found himself trapped in a cycle of creating content that didn't make him happy, but provided him with financial stability. Qin Shield faced an identity crisis. He wondered if he should continue down this path, sacrificing his artistic passion for money, or if he should try to find a way to balance both. He reflected on his journey as a writer, on what success really meant to him. It was in this moment of reflection that Qin Shield made a decision. He decided to leave the project that had brought him financial success, even if it meant facing financial uncertainties again. He decided he was not willing to compromise his integrity as an artist, and that he would seek opportunities that allowed him to create meaningful and true works for himself. With this decision, Qin Shield faced the unknown with courage. He began to explore different forms of artistic expression, seeking his true passion and authenticity as a writer. Although the path ahead was uncertain, he embraced it. He was uncertain, but determined to follow his heart and create works that filled him with satisfaction and fulfillment. Inside the car, the young man was very surprised to see a beautiful young woman beside him. Asura suggested that the young man grab a rice cake. The writer and the company executive stared at each other in silence. To not waste time, the young man quickly finished his lunch. Not to waste time, he gave up the rice cake. Suddenly, the writer jumped up and said he needed to go. The woman grabbed his shoulder and asked him to wait. She asked the writer why he didn't take the rice cake. The young man wanted to leave. Fun Chill said he couldn't take a rice cake from a stranger. The woman was shocked by his response. She addressed the writer formally by his full name. The young man was surprised at how she could know him. The woman told the writer that she was perfectly normal and not a suspicious person. The young man didn't know what to say. He looked at the woman surprised and wondered what to say to her. She told the writer that she came to him to completely change his life. The meeting resulted in nothing. At night, the president was talking to her secretary while sitting in the park. The secretary stood next to her boss, who was in a bad mood and silent. The girl understood what happened. She said that in the end, the meeting didn't end successfully. The secretary was telling her boss that the boy ran away when they met, and he didn't accept the president's word. The girl sat down and sadly wondered to herself. She didn't understand why the boy didn't believe her, even though she approached him sincerely. The secretary replied that it was obvious. If a complete stranger appeared in front of a woman and offered to buy food for her, and then tried to change her life, she would also be scared. The secretary astutely said that if her boss offered help within the company or in a business transaction, people would accept it with great gratitude. But Von Chill is not a businessman. He didn't believe the girl and ran away. The girl reported that people in the world don't easily trust each other. That's why they always betray and deceive while living their lives. The president, more than anyone else, should know how the world works. The girl felt heavy and troubled. She concluded that if the boy didn't believe her, she couldn't help him, even though she really wanted to. The secretary recalled the ancient Asian wisdom that says a man should know himself and know his enemy so that in any battle, he will not be defeated. The secretary said that if her boss wanted to approach the boy, First, a study of his surroundings would be necessary. Sanva decided to follow her secretary's advice. She decided to follow the principle of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy. Then she remembered the girl's words about knowing a person first before helping them. The secretary advised her boss to read all the memoirs of Nano and Sho. The woman walked through the library. This reminded her of her years of research in the field of business. After a day of searching, the girl was resting in her hotel. She was tired and lying on the table and was not very happy with the results. The secretary went to her. She saw there were many papers near the boss. The girl said she would figure everything out herself sooner or later. She reported that Nan Kung-chio hadn't made his recent works erotic for male readers. The president exploded with a great deal of emotion. She was very interested in the Ero Manhwa. She asked the girl if the new information made her feel obscene. She continued to speculate that Nan Kung-chu was no longer the same person. He might have lost his writing nature. He might have lost his right to be saved because of it. The supervisor didn't respond. Olsen was overwhelmed with emotion. She didn't even know what to say. That's when the president said, "You can't discredit someone just because they changed the genre of their work." The secretary thought about how to help her boss. She told her that if the president really felt that way, the girl should study all the manhwas diligently. This would help the lady get closer to Nan Kung-chio. A detailed analysis of the manhwa would help her know what kind of women the writer preferred. The lady studied all the manhwas meticulously. This helped her know the boy's tastes and preferences. As she realized that Nan Kung-chu often drew girls as office secretaries, women were also often depicted wearing glasses completely in the style of an office secretary. She wore a corset to slim her waist and enhance her breasts. She also wore glasses, giving her the appearance of an intelligent office secretary. This outfit completely matched Nanu's preferences. The secretary told her boss that her current appearance would dramatically increase the writer's sympathy for her. That said, the rest depended on President Chu. Chu sat in her apartment and practiced drawing. The artist was sketching an image for the next manhwa when he heard the doorbell ring. At that moment, the boy didn't want to be distracted from his work. He continued drawing, but the doorbell kept ringing insistently. The girl stood by the door and impatiently waited for the boy to open it with irritation and impatience. The writer asked her to come in. He saw a beautiful young woman. She addressed him by his full name, Nan Kung-chio. The woman asked for some time to talk. The boy looked at her, thinking he had seen her somewhere before. Several assumptions crossed his mind. Looking closer, he recognized in the stranger a woman he had seen before at the restaurant. He hurried with all his might to the door, trying to close it as quickly as possible. The girl resisted, holding the door open. The boy was very agitated. He didn't understand what was happening and what the woman wanted from him. He replied that he had nothing. After calming down, the girl said she just wanted to continue. She asked the painter to open the door. The boy opened the door and asked irritably what the girl wanted from him. He thought she wanted to lure him into a cult or a pyramid scheme. In the end, the writer said it was okay. The girl realized she had to act different. The man timidly responded that he couldn't do anything. He wanted the woman to leave. It was then that the girl tore his shirt with all her strength. Not far from the first floor of the building was a secretary. She watched with astonishment as her boss acted. The secretary appreciated this movement from the president. The man felt disheartened. He didn't know what to say or do standing near the door. The woman said they needed a place to talk to each other. She shouted to the man through the door that if he used it, he would have to pay. She also shouted that she wasn't going anywhere until he paid her back. The man was very surprised. He asked the woman what he had done and if she was in her right mind. The lady angrily shouted back at him that he couldn't call himself a man if he didn't pay her back. The writer asked the woman to come in for a minute. She objected and told the man he could try to have her for free again. The writer asked the woman to lower her voice and come in. The woman said her voice had always been quite scared like that. The man asked her to lower her voice or the neighbors might misunderstand. Lao Sanva sat in the artist's house, ready to socialize. Cho sat across from her, silent and still. After a short period of time, the man gathered his thoughts and began to speak. He spoke uncertainly, unable to understand why this woman wanted to meet him so badly. The man decided the girl needed his money. He made it clear he had no personal interest in religion and no extra money to buy anything. The woman remained silent in response. In the end, the man said the woman was wrong if she thought he had money. The woman addressed him by his full name, Enconch, and refuted the man's fears that she needed money. She openly stated she was interested in his work and came to help. The woman asserted she wanted to fit well into the man's life. Concho remained silent, looking surprised at his interlocutor. There was a long, silent pause. The woman also remained silent, looking at her interlocutor. After a brief thought, the writer said he was completely right. He asked the woman if she wanted to convert him. Oh, she stood up suddenly. She was ready to respond to the writer very sharply. The woman firmly replied that she didn't want to convert the guy. and didn't want to sell him anything. She described herself as a devoted reader and fan of CCH. The man was bewildered. He couldn't believe he had a fan. The lady opened up. She said the artist's work gave her courage and self-confidence. The man's mood dramatically improved. He was very surprised that at least someone appreciated his work. He timidly asked the woman about their common taste because she liked the erotic mother. The lady immediately denied the erotic mother and told the artist which of his mornings she liked the most was the season of trembling cherry petals. The lady remembered in detail that there were only 3 volumes in the artist's novel, but still, it was enough. This masterpiece showcased the human nature of its author. The woman said that one of his morning writings gave her strength to move forward with her life. For this reason, she came to see him. Now, she asked the writer if there was anything she could help him with. The man remained silent in response. Here, he told the woman that he no longer wrote anything. She became confused. The writer revealed that he simply struggled daily just to sustain himself. He couldn't find a suitable job, so he was forced to draw erotic manga just to survive. He told the woman that she was wasting time thinking about his past works. He explained that back then, he was just lucky. He was young and had good thoughts in his head. He was involved in a big project that intersected with the theme of his current work. The author couldn't think of any interesting plot anymore. Because of this, he asked the woman to leave. Sanva said excitedly that she was sure of how she felt when she read the writer's works. The man abruptly replied to her that he couldn't write such things anymore. Gonchil became very nervous. He didn't understand the woman's insistence. The writer decided that the woman's arrival and request showed that he was a successful failed writer for the millionth time. He sent her away. The man rudely exclaimed that he didn't need anyone's help. He used the remnants of his talent to make a living somehow. He slammed the door shut in front of the woman. She was stunned. The girl stood there and looked surprised at the closed door. She hoped for a different outcome. The writer decided that the woman thought he was a successful writer and therefore decided to help him. The lady was very tense. Her hands were even trembling with excitement. She didn't know what to do now. The woman realized that the reason for her failure was her ego. She felt that her lack of tact was the reason for the conflict with the writer. The president was very upset. She realized that her wrong actions had hurt the author of the manhwa. Lad sat in the inn at night. She pondered over the events of the previous day. She was resting on the couch and was very sad. A good effort ended in nothing. Her secretary came to her and offered the boss a whiskey with ice. The woman replied that she was perfectly fine. The secretary examined her boss very carefully. She was concerned about the condition of the president. The secretary mentally noted that the boss seemed very downcast. She had never seen her like this before. The girl remembered that the boss had faced difficulties before, but had never lost her composure. Nothing got to her. The lady often said that true strength is shown not in never falling, but in the ability to rise no matter what. The boss wasn't called a ghost president for nothing. She always managed to assert herself, but at the moment, the woman had a very simple expression on her face. The secretary looked at her boss and wondered how she could help her. It was very unusual for a secretary to look at her boss and see her in such a state. Here, the girl began to speak. She remembered that she had already suggested to the boss that the secretary floated the idea of contacting the editor and asking the writer to receive a draft. The woman responded with a flat refusal, as the president said the author's work was sacred to her. She couldn't take control over it. The secretary agreed with her boss. The lady dreamily said she didn't want power and wealth, but wanted to become an ordinary person again. She wanted to return to the anonymity that existed before Suva Industry was created. The president expressed her desire to help Kim Sho become her support and source of strength, helping him create another great work, like his masterpiece, Cherry Blossom. The secretary, named Mingi, listened to her boss with great interest. She liked the boss's suggestion. Mingi agreed with Sanva's thoughts. She was ready to help the president with everything. The secretary said that if her boss was willing to go so far, she would come up with a new plan, and this plan would not go against the president's wishes. N opened up to him when he approached his apartment. He even considered calling his editor and telling him that he couldn't do the job he had applied for. Just as he heard a young woman approaching him, he looked up and recognized the woman who had visited him before. He looked at her for a long time without understanding what she wanted. "Oh, someone," the writer greeted her. She called him by his full name. Kenu asked irritably why she had come again and what she was planning this time. The woman responded conciliatorily. The man was surprised by this turn of events. He asked again what she wanted to ask. "Oh, someone," asked if the writer needed a free cleaning lady. She was very surprised. Kenu stood up and stared at the woman in front of him. He still thought she had come to be a free cleaning lady there. The writer bluntly said he didn't need a cleaning lady. The woman repeated that she could work for free. She mentioned the mess in his room. She offered to cook for him. The man replied that it wasn't about that. The writer wanted to know why the woman was bothering him this way, since she didn't even know him well. He threatened to call the police. The woman unexpectedly agreed even to call the police, a response the man didn't expect. "Oh, someone," said that if the man called the police, she would tell the officers that she was his fan, and came because she wanted to help him by becoming his cleaning lady. Faced with this, The woman was ready to be arrested. Downstairs, her secretary stayed. It was hard for her to hear this conversation. Once again, the guy asked the woman to leave. The woman decided to try her luck once more. She asked the guy to trust her. She said she only came to help him. The writer didn't listen and simply closed the door. The woman was alone, very upset. She stood at the door and didn't know what to say. Then a secretary came up from below. She saw her boss sitting on the floor. Mingi looked at her superior with sorrow and concern. She approached the president and suggested she leave. The woman responded with a flat refusal. Sangwa categorically stated that she would stay there until she was accepted by the writer. The secretary said it was illegal. The boss was surprised. When Mingi clarified that harassment is illegal and punishable by law, this information upset the president. The woman clarified that she would definitely stay and not leave. The receptionist was upset with this answer. The supervisor sternly told the girl to come back. The president strictly stated that her instruction was in order, and Mingi was obligated to obey. It was raining late at night, and Cho was sitting in his apartment working. He realized it would be too much for him to produce 2 chapters per week. He could use a team to do his work, but he didn't have one. The writer sighed deeply. He was gathering his thoughts on the work to think better. He decided to smoke. It would help his creative thoughts. While smoking, he remembered meeting the lady. Now he realized she was really cool. He gathered his thoughts and realized he needed to hurry with the drawing. He had to do it anyway. Gradually, the monotony of the work led him to fall asleep on his desk. The awakening came quite unexpectedly. It was already clear outside. The writer was regaining consciousness. He realized he would have to finish the job. The boy yawned and gradually found himself. He wasn't used to the fact that he had fallen asleep. Kuncho went to the window. He saw the cloudy weather outside. The guy was surprised it was already morning. After standing for a while, he decided to go to the convenience store to buy some food. He put on his cap and prepared to go out for breakfast. He opened the door and left the apartment. Behind the open door, something caught his attention. The writer was scared. He was so surprised that he completely forgot why he had. Right outside his apartment, he saw an exhausted woman sleeping. 2 women were walking down the hallway towards Kuncho's apartment, talking about something. One of them was very surprised to see the writer and a young woman next to him. The women approached and discussed and wondered what they had seen. The writer then moved and reached out to the unconscious lady sitting there. At the same time, the women standing nearby were discussing Koino's life. They remembered that earlier in the week, there was always his apart. Sanva's voice was raised. She was repeating the writer's name, was sick, almost unconscious, but she kept saying she wanted to decide. Also began to the song surge of strength. She got up and sat. The woman intense, limiting her consciousness. Suddenly, someone's voice asked, standing up. She was very surprised. The woman was very surprised to see the writer Kuncho standing next to her. The guy began to explain to the lady. She was sleeping outside while having a fever. He took her off the street so she could rest. Then suddenly the girl got up and jumped out of bed. She bowed to the writer, apologized, expressed her understanding, and said she didn't want to impose herself that way. Chu felt embarrassed. He said there was no need to apologize. The woman once again said she was very sorry. The guy remembered that the lady had already been disrespectful to him. His humor warned him. He smiled and decided to change the conversation to a positive tone. He directly asked the woman who she was for a short period of time. The lady was confused. The writer asked what his guest wanted from him. He also asked where they had seen each other before. The woman was embarrassed. She wanted to respond to the guy in a way that would please him. Someone got excited. She had to make sure to choose the right words so that the writer wouldn't be offended. She frankly told the guy that they used to date. The writer was very surprised. The woman said the guy probably didn't know her personally. Chu leaned back and waited for more information from the guest. The woman was completely frank in saying that she already knew Chu. The writer remained silent as he was gradually becoming interested in her visit. The woman told the writer that his work had once helped her a lot and gave her more strength for life. She indicated that she wanted to help the young writer in any way possible. The boy asked the woman seriously if it was true that she was his fan. She fervently confirmed. The woman confidently said several times that she was a big fan of Chu. The writer thought it was really pathetic. The boy expressed his thought that if his fans' words were true, he was so broken that he needed help finding his own way. The woman abruptly said she wasn't there because she felt sorry for the writer. Sanva added that she had a great desire to learn from the writer how she could be helped to create new masterpieces. Embarrassed, the boy said he was busy creating an erotic novel at the moment. The writer said that's why he couldn't be the kind of person a woman would consider an idol. The woman said it absolutely didn't matter if the boy was drawing an erotic novel. Now the woman added that she wanted to help the boy in any way possible because she believed he could create better masterpieces than before. The writer was flattered by such words. Suddenly, he had an interesting idea and asked the woman if she could draw. She was surprised by such a question and even questioned the writer about it. The boy informed that he currently needed an assistant to work, and if she liked to draw, she could probably help him. Sanva said confidently that she knew how to paint. She agreed with the writer's suggestion and clarified if she had experience in assisting mandap. The woman replied that she wasn't sure if her qualifications were enough to be an assistant to a professional. She said that if she wasn't good enough to be an artist, she was willing to learn. The boy said he couldn't force her to be an artist, and even suggested forgetting the emotionally charged conversation. The woman pleaded for a chance, willing to do any job, like washing clothes or fetching coffee. The man was surprised by the girl's persistence and decided to give her a chance since she was so insistent. The writer placed a piece of paper and a pencil in front of her. The woman prepared to showcase her talent. He asked her to draw something she felt confident about. The woman sat, looking at the man. She was aware she was about to undergo a big test. She was very anxious. The pencil trembled in her hands. She realized the importance of this moment. The lady sat down and began to think intensely about what would represent best with pencil on paper. Her thoughts were jumbled in her head due to excitement. She realized the importance of the upcoming test and vowed to do her best. The man continued to wait. The woman sighed deeply to gather courage. Quietly, she began to draw on a piece of paper, making the first stroke. The man observed her drawing attempts carefully. Gradually, the excitement left the girl. The writer began to wonder and admire. The woman drew very well and delicate. Gradually, the lines began to take shape, and the image of a young and beautiful girl appeared on the paper. The man looked at the final drawing with a fixed gaze. The image intrigued him. The woman couldn't tell if she liked the drawing. She timidly apologized to the writer, saying she might not have talent for drawing because she had never drawn anything like that before. She admitted sincerely that she wanted to help wholeheartedly and promised to work hard on herself. She felt bad for lying to the man before. The writer asked her sincerely if she had never drawn before. There was a long pause. The man stayed and analyzed the drawing. He noticed to himself that the woman had a talent for design. She could convey the feelings of the female character with lines. The writer observed that the woman could create a good drawing relying only on her natural talent. He thought deeply. He realized he was about to make an important decision. He told the woman she was hired and specified when she should start working. The woman was extremely surprised. She couldn't believe the man had hired her. The writer specified that she would have to leave every week or even more frequently until the end of the project. He couldn't pay her, and sometimes she would need to stay overnight. He asked the lady if she was satisfied with these conditions, and she responded with an enthusiastic nod. The man wondered if she would really be able to do this. He remembered he was in a desperate situation now. The writer cheerfully replied to the woman that they had already decided on this. The man asked the woman for her name. She hesitated for a moment and decided to give her name. She hesitated. She wanted to give herself a foreign name for conspiracy. After a brief pause, the woman fell silent. The man didn't understand why she wasn't saying anything. The woman said her name was Sand. At night, the lady was sitting in her hotel room. She was discussing with her secretary the events of the project manuscript he was working on. The woman was very surprised to have received the opportunity to see it. She looked at the images of the manuscript and realized it was professionally done. With enthusiasm, the woman thought that the title of the manuscript, Cherry Blossom Morning, also appeared similarly. The guy said that nowadays, artists don't create drawings on paper as they used to. Sunduk asked why that was. The author explained to her that people use the computer to draw, but he himself is not used to it yet, so he only uses the computer to add shading and other adjustments. He advised the assistant to learn to do this on her own, which would help correct her mistakes. The woman agreed with him. The guy asked the assistant if she knew how to use a computer. She replied that she knew several office programs. The assistant clarified where she needed to start. The guy told her that if she were an office worker, it would help a lot. Co-Shield said he uses photo editing in his work. The assistant immediately deduced that it was a program for graphic works, and he explained to Sunduk that she should be able to correctly determine which layout she would be using. After that, she should pick up that bitmap file. The assistant noted everything. The author pointed out to the woman that he had just explained the concept of channels to her. Here, the assistant admitted that she felt very sorry. She only understood 70% of what she heard, although maybe only 50%, so she bowed and apologized to him. She promised to master all the knowledge she needed by the next day. The guy said it was okay. He didn't expect the woman to do everything in one day. The author asked his assistant to help him with the cleaning of the day. He suggested she start exploring the channels gradually. The woman agreed with him. She sat down at the table and began gradually erasing the sketches with an eraser. She felt it was actually very difficult. The woman had previously assumed that the process would be easy because it was a normal erasing with an eraser on the sketches. She had to erase the pencil marks that were over the drawing lines. She exerted an unexpectedly excessive amount of force, causing the paper to crack and tear part of the drawing. The assistant was very scared. The guy heard the sound and wondered if the assistant had accidentally torn his drawing. She fell to her knees and apologized profusely. She felt she had ruined the very precious manuscript. The assistant decided that she couldn't fix this with money. The woman was in great shock. She was even ready for the writer to hit her or punish her in some way, but only if he kept her in her job. He said he wouldn't hit her. The writer pointed out that his assistant had made a common mistake like beginners do. The drawing should be glued and then scanned. At that moment, Kuncho's fate was being discussed in the editorial office of a publication. One of the junior editors was talking to the editor-in-chief, who was listening in silence and smoking. The girl apologized to him, but didn't understand why Kuncho still needed to be kept in the job. She decided that Kuncho no longer had merit, and his manuscript had a low sales rate among publications. The editor said he didn't believe Kuncho would be able to produce 2 chapters per week with an assistant. She asked for the proposal to be withdrawn. She wanted to introduce the editor to a new reputable author. She requested permission from the editor-in-chief with interest, but the editor-in-chief remained silent and did not react at all. He just smoked. It was then that the editor-in-chief told the girl that her job was to supervise and take care of the author, not Kung Sho. He told the subordinate editor clearly and directly that his decision regarding control was final. He added to the woman that if she had any complaints about the decision, she could use her time to create better content than KSU. The editor was very upset. She didn't expect such a response. She didn't believe Kunchu could create anything normal. She thought so. The editor-in-chief decided to learn to turn stones into diamonds. The editor decided that if the author did not meet the deadline, she would resign. She decided to call Kuncho. An unexpected call distracted the author from important work while he was sketching. He picked up the phone and asked who was calling him. An editor named Manon asked how far he had gotten in his work. The guy replied that he was busy with work at the moment. The girl confirmed to him that this was what he should be doing. She asked about the current progress and how much he had accomplished. He replied that he was almost done drawing the first chapter and was already putting the final words in it. An editor irritated her. She was not satisfied with the speed of the work. She told the guy on the phone that she would go to his house right away and demanded that everything be prepared for the meeting. Kosho was unpleasantly surprised. At the same time, his young assistant was sitting at his house. Mound couldn't enter the writer's apartment. She also apologized for the intrusion and politely greeted near the entrance. He called her an editor now. The editor entered the apartment and saw a mess. She noticed to herself that it smelled like a lonely man's place. Seeing the mess, she felt that the smell belonged to a third-rate author from Manoa whom no one wanted anything to do with. The editor was very surprised. She met his assistant, Sounddoc, and turned to the guy with a silent question. He realized that he hadn't introduced his boss's assistant yet. He explained politely that since he had a rule to deliver 2 chapters per week, he had hired an assistant. The editor was surprised by the word assistant. In her opinion, the more appropriate word would be apprentice. With great attention, the editor noticed that Esdak was incredibly beautiful. She couldn't understand how this girl could become an assistant to a writer. Doc introduced herself to the editor somewhat confused and responded with a greeting. The assistant behaved with an emphasis on modesty, indicating that she was helping the writer in his work. She told the editor that they should understand each other from now on. Nian Ken replied hastily that he was happy to meet her too. Kunal gestured for the editor to sit. He pointed out that he didn't have a sofa, but she could sit at the table. The writer offered the editor a cup of coffee. The lady offered to serve the coffee herself. The editor apologized for any inconvenience. Sidak replied that it was her duty to make the coffee. Len, who sat down at the table and began to study the author's finished drawings severely, said that the writer should realize that she did not understand how the story in Manhwa had progressed from there onwards. The editor kept asking the author why the protagonist was doing this and not otherwise. She didn't understand what the writer meant. Cho didn't understand how to explain it to her. He said that instead of rationalizing the actions of the main character, he decided to try to bring his feelings and emotions to life. The editor was surprised by this answer. She rudely questioned if he had anything else. She always resorted to emotions and sensuality. She added that he should end this, as he was surprised by her response. He realized he would have to change his pattern of work. The publisher asked sternly how long he would stay in the same place. He may have been famous in the past, but now he needs to fight for a place. She demanded results from him before trying to revitalize emotions and feeling. Results would affect the money the author receives. The publisher said that if he couldn't do his best, he would be known as a loser. She even suggested that he admit he was worse than a newcomer who earned less. The author was very discouraged. He kept asking to be replaced. Quenu said he never saw himself as someone special or amazing. The publisher asked why he didn't understand her words. Furthermore, she reminded him that she had already said this information before. He should have realized everything and corrected all the flaws. It was then that Stock intervened in Vera. She had heard them talking before. The assistant said timidly that she didn't intend to eavesdrop, but noticed that the author and the publisher were discussing the 3rd chapter. Here, the lady began to say that because of her work, She was able to read the story completely. She continued to say that the more she read the chapter, the more she felt forced to ponder the emotions of the characters. It was when the editor, Nan, who got tired of listening, interrupted her. She started to reprimand the assistant, saying that she had no right to meddle where she wasn't called. The editor called herself responsible, who had the right to talk to the author. Sound D apologized. The lady began to say patiently that she completely understood that she couldn't interfere because she was just an assistant. Sound Doc pointed out that Khonshu and Manhwa couldn't adequately convey their feelings, so she decided to make it clearer. The editor rudely interrupted and told her not to meddle where she wasn't called. She wasn't interested in the emotions of the characters. The author indicated here that there are comments on this chapter. The guy began to say that he was trying to show the deeper characteristics of the characters because it wasn't about a single emotion, but about feeling a storm of emotions at the same time. The editor interrupted him and said to him not to repeat the same thing again, speaking harshly that if the author did it the way he wanted, the readers wouldn't understand anything. Assistant Sondak raised her hand and wanted to have her say. The lady told the editor that she could understand this in a condescending tone. Sondak started to tell her that she wasn't very interested in the manga industry. She called herself an admirer of Nankung Show. The assistant convincingly said that she completely understood the plot of the 3rd chapter. The editor was surprised. The editor didn't understand how it was a common assistant who wanted to argue with her. That's when she asked Sondak if she knew a lot about plots. Main suggested that the lady herself become a real author and make her debut, so she wouldn't be a common assistant. The editor pointed out that she had an important conversation with the author, so the assistant shouldn't cry. CO asked the editor not to worry and calm her down in every possible way. Here, Sondak flatly responded to the suggestion to mind her own business. The assistant said she knows what she's talking about. She's willing to elaborate on Khonshu's works here. The lady began to elaborate that the author can convey the depth of the character and perspective because of this. Readers would want more and couldn't stop thinking about it. After that, the reader has their own impression of how they should feel about the character. They imagine themselves in their place. Sandra clarified that none of the readers would be able to see any of this if they were looking from a single perspective. Not who said the assistant is talking nonsense for this reason, amateurs remain in the same. The editor also added that if nothing is clear, readers won't read it. She advised the assistant to stop talking about deep feelings. She also reminded that Sho's works don't sell well. In the end, she asked the assistant if she knew how well the works had sold before. Sondak remained silent and didn't know what to say. The assistant looked at the editor and wondered if that was really what happened. Saku reported that Khonshu's success was thanks to the cherry blossom morning season. She continued that this series shows the full range of characters' feelings, making readers think about what's going on. This work encapsulates all sides of both men and women. Suddenly, Suak had an interesting feeling. She began asking the editor if this was possible. The assistant clarified whether the editor might not have fully read all of Kinnell's works, or even started speaking quickly, saying it's no longer what it used to be, emphasizing that the world of manhwa is no longer the same. The assistant said she didn't understand her. The lady began to say that regardless of how the world operates in creating a manhwa, the author and the editor must be able to understand and cooperate with each other. She clarified with the editor how she wanted to help the guy when he hadn't even read him, even though she was told to keep an eye on the author. Sonat asked the editors if it could be that she didn't like the works of author Nkung Sho. The editor herself was very affected by the assistant's accusations. She realized that her assistant was right. The lady said in the end that the senseless meeting that had just happened proved that the assistant was right. She added that if this were indeed the case, removing the editor would be the best solution, the main patience of who ended up. She stood up and decided to leave. She headed for the exit, followed by Connell and his assistant to maximize the effect. The editor slammed the door with all his might after the editor left. The woman asked the boy if she said something wrong to the name of Aquilino. He remained silent and didn't know what to say. Mengi, the secretary, was sitting in the hotel room with her boss. She told the president that she made a lot of noise. The girl clarified that her boss had interfered in the relationship between the manhwa author and the editor, and as a result, neither was satisfied. Nain Ken was angry. Mengi continued speaking. She said everyone calls Nain Ken an editor because they treat her with respect. However, the main point is that the client is an employee of the publisher. The lady listened silently. The secretary continued saying that the editor has power and can tell the author what he can or cannot do. If we look at the situation from another point, he has the same status as Ozuma, the secretary, that her boss facilitates so much that he could completely cut off the relationship between the editor and Khonshu. Girl pointed to the president at the writer's house. Mengi tells her boss that she's by the name Set as an assistant. Khonshu's don't set decided to break the silence, wondered what she should do. Everything the secretary said was true. Ungwa said they could fire her. The secretary replied that there were no guarantees that wouldn't happen. The secretary was fully convinced that her boss had hurt the right. Mengi stopped talking and decided to change clothes while her boss thought. The lady sat on on the floor next to the writer, saying with regret that she had committed a grave sin, remembering the trusting Khunchu who thought in his heart that she had come to him as a disciple. At that moment, the writer accepted her as such. The lady didn't even know what her place was. She conflicted with the client. The president said she would accept any punishment, willing to have part of her salary deducted. She begged the author not to fire her. The surprised writer said he had not imagined Sandak in this light. He addressed the woman directly and asked if there was anything else she hadn't told him about herself. The lady became nervous, realizing the author suspected something from her. Kong Chu looked closely at his interlocutor, waiting for her response. Lazily repeated the question if there might be something she hadn't told about herself. It was clear she wanted to hide something. In the end, Sal said he didn't believe there was anything the writer inside him didn't know. The author insisted she tell the truth, remembering Sal's attitude with the editor. It wasn't the behavior of an ordinary person, given the trust his assistant inspired in him and his logical tone. He drew some conclusions here. Kong Chu confidently said he concluded that Sal is a lady from a wealthy family. This left the assistant very happy. She fully confirmed the author's words and apologized for lying. The author said that was what he thought. He told the woman she was very beautiful and seemed to need nothing. Upon hearing these words, the assistant felt relieved. The lady began to tell an invented story. Her father's business was declining at that time, and she came to seek work on her own. Kong listened with great attention, said he didn't know, and apologized to the woman. The assistant said it was okay. The lady added that she didn't know how to apologize for her rudeness. The writer agreed it was true, and that she shouldn't have interfered in her meeting with the editor. Here, the boy added cheerfully that the conflict that occurred yesterday made him much happier, indicating he was very happy after the editor left. He didn't have time to do anything after what Saul said. The writer frankly told the assistant that everything she said to the editor were things he wanted to say, but couldn't. In the end, the guy said the woman didn't need to worry. There was nothing wrong with what she said. The lady fell silent. The reassuring response pleased her. She was grateful to the writer for not being angry anymore. Kunzol added that he didn't praise his assistant for intervening in his conversation with the director. He asked her to be careful during her meetings with her client. The lady replied that she understood. It was then that Sandak remembered what happened yesterday and said the editor hadn't been in a bad mood. The writer asked if he was okay, that he hadn't apologized to her personally. He decided he had acted wrongly. The responsibility for his employees' actions fell on him. The man decided to call the publisher first and talk to her. Editor N. Kin was sitting in his apartment in the afternoon. His apartment was a mess. The woman was irritated and lacked energy to clean. Yesterday's meeting with the writer had left her completely out of sorts. To distract herself, she sat down to work on the computer. She wanted to forget the previous meeting. The appearance of the writer's assistant kept coming back to her mind as she wondered if the editor had read Khunchu's work. She wanted to forget everything, but the image that bothered her kept reappearing in her mind. She had seen Sandak's aspect several times when he said he wanted to help the writer without reading his works. The editor was very annoyed. Whatever she did, she couldn't get him out of her head. She especially didn't understand what was happening with Sandak. After all, he was just a common assistant. It hurt the editor deeply that an assistant dared to reprimand the chief editor. The editor gave Khunchu authorship, not because he was a fan of him. The editor decided to read the writer's writings to expose him. He wanted to prove that the writer was nothing more than a third-rate author. Sitting next to the computer, Enkin thought that Khunchu's works were not valuable enough to be sold as a book. Only the ebooks for sale at the hotel saved Lady Ozunu. She was talking to her secretary. She informed her boss that she had found detailed information about Nine Ken. She discovered where he lived. The girl continued saying that the editor lived in a house that wasn't very far from there. Menji continued saying that the editor had presented herself several times at a big company for a writer position, but ended up being put in charge of the manual department, which later fell, resulting in who is in her current workplace in the cement room of Mangwa that she manages. Sat in silence and listened to the detailed information about the editor. Mingi recounted that most of the authors whom she supervised were women who hadn't had much success, but it couldn't be said that the publishers lacked talent. Suddenly, Sonuk asked about the editor's marital status. MG replied that Nain's father, who's the owner of the store he manages with his wife, the editor has an older brother. The lady decided to go to Nain Ken and apologize. She didn't want the writer to get into trouble because of what she did. The secretary replied that it wasn't a good idea. Mingi added to her boss that even if she apologized, the editor wouldn't accept it. The lady added that she would have apologized sincerely. The secretary clarified that an apology wouldn't have served for anything, because the editor and the president are at different levels due to the influence Ozuna has. It would only worsen the situation. Mingi said proudly that her boss is a strong and proud person, so she should stay away from him. She promised to come up with another plan, making a philosophical comparison, saying that there's nothing good when oil and fire confront each other. The president was happy that her secretary thought that way about her once again. The lady said that it was her mistake, and that she shouldn't have gotten involved in this matter. She ended the conversation, hoping that the situation would pass, and the writer wouldn't have problems. At the same time, the editor Nin Quem was sitting at her house, determined and focused on the internet. The woman had previously set a goal to study all of Kunchu's works. She insisted and worked almost frantically with the mouse, navigating through many pages of Manhwa. The author needed to find something to compromise the writer. Nain thought she had found something. Finding something interesting captured all of her attention. The editor remembered Kunchu's words about how he tried to show the underlying traits of the characters. The author had specified that it wasn't about a single emotion, but a mix of various emotions at the same time. There was a pause, and Nain thought about it. She compared in her mind what she had heard from the writer and what she had just seen. After a while sitting, the writer decided it was time to act. She got up resolutely from her seat and decided to go immediately to the bookstore. She hoped to find something important there, although it was already late. Nain, who came to complete her search in the store while she was in the library, started browsing the shelves for something that interested her. She found and looked closely at the shelves. She was sure she had seen one of Kunchu's books for sale there before. That's when she finally succeeded in her search. She fixed her gaze on the book she found on the shelf among the books of various authors. There was also one by Kan Shu. She held the book carefully between her hands, thinking it was very old, but there were still copies for sale. The woman was ecstatic after finding the book she was looking. She held the book between her hands and began to think about what to do next. Nain walked determinedly toward the exit and thought she was only buying the book to familiarize herself with Kunchu's work. The secretary told the supervisor that the editor had just left the bookstore. Mingi clarified if she should follow Nain-ken. The lady replied that it was okay and that they would stop there for today. The secretary traveled by car with her boss. Mingi reminded the lady that she wanted to see where the editor used to go to find her by chance on the street. Orzinga thought that this encounter would seem suspicious to the editor. Suddenly, the supervisor said they had to pass by the bookstore. Such a request surprised Ming. The secretary felt very close to her boss. The boss and the secretary imagined themselves together in bed before going to sleep. They entered the bookstore together. Mengi asked quietly why they had come. The lady thought it had been a long time since she had wandered into a bookstore so carefree and free. The secretary asked if perhaps her boss wanted to buy a book or something like that. Lady Sunga thought if she had already come. The secretary observed the president in silence. The lady stared silently for a while. She didn't exactly remember what she needed. She thought that probably the book she needed wasn't there because it was very old. The woman said she wanted to buy another copy of the book to add to her collection. The secretary asked which work she was referring to. The lady said she wanted a book by Kunchu titled Season of Cherry Blossom Petal Elections. The secretary said the store probably didn't have copies of the book since it had been published a long time ago. MG said there wouldn't be copies at the entrance and decided to ask if they had books of that kind in stock. The supervisor thanked the lady and agreed with her subordinate. The book she needed probably hadn't been reissued. The secretary addressed her boss, calling her president, and said she was discouraged by the situation. The lady remembered she should call her Sua Onuk. The secretary repeated her boss's new name to herself. The lady said the book she wanted probably wasn't in the store. Mengi informed that there was only one copy left of volumes 1 to 3 in the store. The girl added that they had just sold out. The searchers didn't realize the books they needed had been bought by the publisher. She was on her way home at that moment. Nainin went up to her apartment. She wanted to start reading as soon as possible. The editor was lying on the bed looking at the books she had bought. She was eager for the moment and began to read. Nain Quen put her hand on the cover and prepared to study this Kunchu book. At that moment, she realized that familiarity with the work could seriously change her attitude toward the writer. She remembered Sandu's words, wondering how an editor could help an author create a work if she hadn't even read their work. After reading, the writer lay down on the bed exhausted and admitted defeat to herself. Nain thought that Kunchu was also actually an author who showed a multifaceted palette of feelings. She thought once again that she had made a mistake. The next day, editor Nung hurried to meet Chu at a cafe. Nung sat across from her. Chu took out his manga and placed it neatly on the table. Nung sat pondering as she watched Kum, who was drinking his coffee. This time she decided to plan the meeting outdoors, apparently so that Sushi would completely disappear from view. Nung realized she couldn't ask for a new editor, but working with Na was painful because they had different goals. I observed Kyung, who was drinking her coffee. This time she decided to schedule the meeting outdoors, apparently so that Suksi completely disappeared from Chul's sight. Chul realized that he couldn't ask for a new editor, but working with Na was miserable because they had different goals. After a while, Yun Kung suggested starting a meeting, and Nam agreed with her. She began to talk about page 80, regarding the uninterrupted monologue in 3 parts. Kun knew she would focus on this point. Sunsin thought she would have to reduce it to a panel, because she was getting bored with this editor's fight. Kung noticed the expression of disgust on Chul's face and continued. The protagonist denies his own emotions. Na supposed that Nam did it on purpose to change things. Sunsin reflected for a while, disengaging from the discussion about the manga in question. Later, she said she portrayed this scene on purpose to convey exactly those feelings. Chio suggested she cut some pieces to fit well with something fashionable nowadays. Na replied that she would like it to consist of only 2 parts and create a climax at the end, adding that this twist of events should not end with the character's hidden emotions. Sunsenim, in turn, was perplexed because normally the editor Na behaved differently, but now she was interested in his opinion on his own work, which was not like their usual meetings. She not only criticized his work, but also pointed out its flaws and tried to correct them. Na was attentive to his person and properly discerning his intention. Keel supposed she was right. Sunsenim admitted that he had the bad habit of prolonging emotional tension, thus increasing the chapter, adding that instead of a 3-part scene, it would be more effective to reduce it to 2. Kung returned the smile. Na said she wanted to use this chapter to develop the story. Nam replied then she would have to cut the opening segment dealing with everyday life scenarios. Yun Kung pointed out she would like to keep that fun part of the narration in place. The editor suggested she take a story from the past and bring it up, after which they could finally move on to the beginning of the next chapter. Sunsenim didn't realize what was happening. Suddenly, he felt pleased to be chatting with her. He couldn't help but feel drawn into his interactions with the editor within the story. Anam Kung found it quite amusing and funny, beginning to like what was happening. After all, she felt like she was talking to someone who had closely followed her work, discussing about it. Zenim realized it was the first time she had enjoyed interacting with Na so much. After a while, they left the cafe in a good mood and got into her car, smiling and happy. At the end of the discussion about the work, they continued their pleasant conversation. Chul thanked her for today's meeting, saying it was very useful. Jun Kung replied that there was no need to thank her since she was just doing her job, and that's how an editor is supposed to behave with an author. Son Senim never ceased to be amazed. Nam then decided to apologize to her for having misunderstood her before, as she had the prejudice that this young man knew nothing, furthermore showed no interest in his work. However, thanks to today's meeting, her opinion had drastically changed, adding that he was the only one who was not trying his best, and asked her to take care of him from now on. Jun Kung absent-mindedly said she didn't need to apologize to her because she had already done so originally at that moment. Sun Senim shouted that there was a car right in front of them. Na was horrified, looking ahead. She instantly stepped on the brake pedal in fear, but unfortunately, it was too late. She continued to lose control, resulting in a collision with another car, causing an accident. The editor Yun Kung literally grabbed the steering wheel and went into shock for a while. The injured young man, in turn, hurried to get out of the car and began to provoke Na in every possible way. Saying that the driver couldn't see where he was going and that he was causing a fight, Kyun rolled down the window and looked pityingly at the guy he didn't expect to see a young woman driving. He asked if he was hurt. During the first few seconds, it was as if he had swallowed his tongue. But then, he started shouting angrily that she didn't know how to drive, and that she should apologize naturally. I apologized. But the guy insisted, saying that he had a broken bumper. He insisted on resolving the problem. Right now, Kyun apologized once again. The exasperated guy told her that apologizing wouldn't help at all and demanded that she get out of the car. Then they did it with Sion Zenim, and the young man declared that it would cost 800,000 WS to repair it upon hearing such a figure. She was stunned and didn't know what to do. She said it was too expensive, but the guy started telling her otherwise, saying that repair costs would have been even higher if he had gone to an official repair center, and if he took the car to an unofficial service center, the price would be around 800,000 WS. He demanded her contact information to reach an agreement on the matter at that moment. Sun Zanim decided to intervene in the situation, saying that it wasn't quite right, adding that they should first contact their insurance companies to resolve the problem. The guy hinted that she shouldn't get involved in this situation because they are already dealing with the problem with her. He says that if she goes to her insurance company, they will raise the premiums, and that she is trying to solve everything amicably. Chul, delicate and completely calm, said it was his fault the accident. The guy in turn got angry, pointing out that he was trying to blame someone else, while threatening Kun Nam said he had no intention of facing him, and that they were driving on the main road while he didn't even use the turn signals, as his fault is much greater than hers. The young man again told Nam to mind his own business when asked by the lady, who was Chol, nervously announced that he was her husband. The editor, Na, was immediately stunned and looked surprised at the furious Zenim, who continued to insist, saying that if the accident had occurred at an intersection, they should go to the insurance company. He added that raising the tone would not solve the problem, and that there was a video recorder in the car, and they don't have to enter negotiations until the insurers intervene and set the prices for the repairs. After some persuasive arguments from Sun Zenim, the guy gave in and they contacted their insurance companies, then everyone dispersed amicably in different directions. Kunina remained silent for a while. Chul decided to apologize to editor Yoon Kyung for calling her his wife, because that way they have the opportunity to respond to this insolent to the insinuation that he did not have a video recorder. Nam replied that he had to inventory at a crossroads. The car going straight always has right of way for Kun. The situation was obvious, because the guy, knowing it, kept trying to evade his responsibility. In the end, his part assumed 30% of the blame. And since then, both insurance companies intervened as a result of what was able to fix the mess. The result was not bad, as Nam thought the editor Na listened carefully to Chul and decided to thank him for solving the problem because he knows nothing about cars, and that guy would probably force her to pay an unimaginable amount of money, noticing that she was only confused when the man started yelling at her and her thoughts began to clutter. Chul said she is right because men always try to solve a problem by just raising their voice. At first, Kun didn't want to interfere because he knew how angry editor Na was, and told him he listened carefully to Nama, who tried to help her fight against him immediately. Yoon Kung asked him if he thought he was so vulnerable, actually pretending to be a strong person. Seon Sung Nim denied it. Chul said he should have come to her rescue before, but if he bothered her, he apologizes. Editor N looked at him smiling after an awkward pause. He decided to confess, saying they were. Chenim is absolutely right, and she is the person who messed up, after which she apologized for behaving rudely with him. Kun replied that it was not his fault at all, but the guy who tried to deceive her. Hun Kung said sadly that he wouldn't talk about the accident now and about his new book, saying that she was very wrong that day. Cheol was surprised. There's no way he expected this development from her, especially since she admits she's wrong. They stayed silent for a while. Sonim looked at her with interest. Nam Kung asked if it really was about her new work, and what she got wrong exactly. Na said that she underestimated her writing style and didn't behave as an editor should, after confirming that her assistant was right because she hadn't read her previous works. She leaned towards writing what was trending, but the editor's job is to understand the author and help them create a work that shows their individuality. Hun Kung repeated his words of regret for that unfair treatment towards him, which was expressed on his part. Sonim looked at her again, then suddenly leaned back in her chair and smiled at her. Cheol decided to have an honest conversation like that, saying that she wasn't completely wrong after all. He's old-fashioned, and some of his comments hit the mark. He lacked skill and couldn't do what was asked of him. Na replied that the emotion she conveyed in her previous series, Cherry Blossom, is what we were told this type of work is hard to find, but it's actually an old book called Cherry Blossom that came out years ago. Surprised, Kun added that in many ways the fault was hers, because the author must be able to take the editor's comments and incorporate them into their text without losing their style. After all, that's true professionalism. Cheol smiled at them. Editor Na thought about her words. Sonin murmured that today's meeting was for him, seeing how hard he worked. Nam told him he would try to get good results in the next chapter. Yoon Kung remained silent while smiling, then even said Kun replied that he would eagerly await his next chapter and would do his best. A few minutes later, Editor Na successfully brought Sonin and Ma home when he felt encouraged to continue working on the next chapter. In turn, assistant Sunun brought him a snack and observed what he was doing. She was tormented by a question she still dared to ask Sonim about how her meeting went to his editor. As Nam returned in a good mood, Cheol responds excitedly that the meeting has been very productive, and they have had time to talk about many things, adding that the editor and Kung actually have a very honest and sweet character trait. Kun said that she hadn't noticed before, but the editor has a quite beautiful and handsome face, which displeased her a lot to hear that. She added that she was shy, but that made her even cuter. But that wasn't really important. The most important thing was that they discussed all the points of the work and finally were able to understand each other, which will have a positive impact on the workplace. Suk, in general, turned sour upon hearing their impressions about the editor. Cute commented that it's good to find common ground with a strict person like her. In summary, they understand each other on a work level. Sun clarified this point. Kun thought her question was strange, replied that it was just a business action, adding that they only talked about work and that nothing like that was happening. For a moment, Suk imagined herself as his girlfriend, wearing a beautiful wedding dress. Sun, in turn, asked Kun to investigate the editor and to find out about her if she gets the chance. Find out who her friends are and if she has a partner. Minji had caught the hint that this message came more from personal feelings than business reasons. But Hua said that it's strictly a business investigation and wants to make sure that Yoon Kung's personality is suitable and that there won't be any problem. Sun said that she initially worked with Sonim for personal reasons and only needs to do this investigation since no questions of this kind are being asked. Min replied that everything would be done. In the beginning, Suun just wanted to thank Chul for the help he had given her. Also, thanks to Sun, Kun was able to establish a relationship with the editor, which was her goal. Jua suggested that she is the reason why Nam and Na are together. About Jay replied, so at least that seems from the outside the president. Sunun remained silent for a few seconds, thoughtful, after which he said that it was not enough. Ju was surprised Hwa said that Kun did not fully pay, because he still has to do a good job for which he is paid a decent amount. Min suggested that despite all the help on the way to the success of Sonam, President Yua should also pay attention to his company. Sun wondered what is happening in the company right now. The assistant added that his performance in the first quarter has deteriorated significantly, adding that it is most likely due to the investment in Sangwa factories in China. The Finns Juan replied that given that just started, this project isn't surprising, but the vice president should oversee the supervision. Jay says he received a message from Du trying to blame Sun since she was the one who created the project. Actually, there was a meeting of all the directors and managers of the company in which they began to talk actively about the project. The end, they say they have bad results in the first quarter, which coincides with something less than 50%, which was a big loss for the company. And it wouldn't have been profitable to buy advertising for the project, which was Sun's fault, as she offered to invest in it. Shareholders were equally unhappy, but they hadn't yet complained. What needed to be done was to get shareholder buy-in and then focus on the project. Hadn't yet complained. What had to be done was to secure the shareholders' support and then focus the project on the other side, saying that it was due to the deterioration of results, and since they still had a lot of time, at least a few months, they should be able to stabilize the situation. Meanwhile, President Hua was trying to relax and rest at her home. Leiro Mangwa, who also helped as an assistant, was a pleasure at that moment. He brought a bottle of wine and a snack. Ju asked if she was rereading that specific manga again, to which Sun didn't respond affirmatively. He noticed that lately, she had been rereading the book quite a bit. Ju said that now that she had a copy, she read it all the time and thought she had ruined the book, but it was quite pleasant to realize that. Suan had a few glasses of wine, after which she began to fall asleep in the chair. MG was about to leave, but at that moment, S opened her eyes and said that it was a real pleasure to be at her house after a glass of wine and a good snack. Kana observed that it had been a while since she weighed herself. San said it was all right. Jay said that when she was with Chu and ate fast-digesting foods, Chu gained weight. The president asked him to end this subject because he had already answered that question and was doing well. Khan stated he had investigated Nail Kung as she asked. Mim began to read about her, saying that she was 26 years old, graduated from university, and her family consisted of a single mother and an older brother. Suan listened attentively, sipping her glass of wine carelessly. Ju discovered an interesting fact about her father, saying that Oppa Naon Kung was also a manga author. Ju supposed that Naon had started working in this field under her father's influence or became an editor to help him. Khan reflected that he would not draw hasty conclusions. Suan asked what genre she worked in and for which company. The assistant informed that she was not working with companies at the moment. To be more precise, she had never debuted in this field. What makes it impossible to call her a second-rate artist is that she once wrote a short story for a small company, but none of her books were published. Her younger sister also worked as an editor at a publishing house, but never managed to get an official series. Director Nai is known by other authors as a cold and stubborn person. The reason for this could be her father, Supan thought. He believed that the reason wouldn't have been obvious if he hadn't been close to her Oppa. Anna was offended that her father couldn't debut, while others less talented debuted. This way of thinking is understandable, but although she despised all authors, it didn't stop her from approaching Nkung. Kabu could be evaluated as a green light. Va asked what this meant. En suggested that Nai might have cut ties with Oppa for Chu's sake. Saman called this nonsense. Chi added that Nai saw her father in Zenin, and thus, the feelings of support were passed on to the author. Ju realized that the editor couldn't distinguish between her work and her personal life, although she didn't seem to be that kind of person. Besides, she had summoned Sonsin for today's meeting, Saman thought. Min said that the last time they met, Nai had tea with him and acted differently. She also said that this was why Va was staying at the hotel, now that she had so much free time, and didn't know what could happen between a boy and a girl, hinting at intimacy. San refused to believe that Chu couldn't distinguish between relationships and work. Sipping her wine, she said that it was never a problem for anyone, and the truth was that if they got along so well together, one couldn't imagine a better life partner. This way, the author solves two problems at once, gaining both a relationship and an editor in their favor. San literally melted at the moment. Ju, on the other hand, continued reasoning, saying that the best way to achieve her goal was to bring Nama and the assistant closer together. Mingi suggested that helping them get along was the best way. To achieve his goal, President Sunu preferred to remain silent at that moment, staring intently at the papers. At first, Kung seemed like a bored person who could have harmed Zenin if he had been on foot. San remembered that Kunchu expressed his gratitude to the editor while finalizing the concept of his current work, adding that those days would pass quietly. Jua continued reading, had the idea of trying to help them strengthen their bonds. San leaned back in his chair significantly. Assistant Mingi noticed that President Hua was plotting something. Meanwhile, Sonin hurried to meet the editor. They entered one of the city's cafes, where Kunchu was finishing the last chapters of his concept. The editor, who was watching enigmatically, noticed Sonin, who was absorbed in the case. Chol continued without distraction and obediently finished the chapters while she watched in silence. Sometime later, Kun announced the completion of chapters 9 to 12 of his concepts. He carefully handed the manuscripts to editor Na, asking her to read them. She agreed kindly and then began to examine his work, taking pleasure in the process. She couldn't contain her excitement and smiled. Sonin, in turn, was happy. Kun declared it was an incredible job, pointing out how well Zol had done. He replied cheerfully that he would take care of the rendering. The editor said they had finished chapter U, and that he would take care of the publication schedule. Sinin realized that when they met, everything went well, and added that he was very grateful for the promotion of his work and the responsible management of the project. Na began searching in her bag, saying she had a gift for him for the good work. Jad anticipated the moment. The editor placed the clipboard on the table. The editor declared that now he could create his masterpieces not just on paper, adding that it was to work more efficiently. Sonin replied that he couldn't accept such an expensive gift. Was surprised. Kun said the device suited him better. Editor Q1 replied that she had the same device, and at that moment had the idea to trick a little and not tell the whole truth, stating that the company had given it to him. Sonin looked at her surprised. The editor said this tablet would be accounted as a corporate expense to help Chu in exchange for special content. Kei accepted delightedly, thinking it was a great company, adding that he had always wanted to get something like that, and that he wouldn't disappoint them. Sonin wanted to thank him in some way, saying the content couldn't be a gift to her. He invited her to dinner and naturally treated her. Na tried to politely refuse because the company had given it to her, but Ko insisted, saying he wanted to make her feel good. Besides, with her gluttony, she would appreciate the company in some way. Kun excitedly asked if they could go to an expensive place. X replied that only where his finances allowed. After a while, they gathered at night to go to a cheap cafe. There they actively began to celebrate the success of their cooperation, drinking alcohol and enjoying a good meal. The highlight for editor Na was that those sushi were absolutely delicious. She thanked En, who replied it was just sushi. In quiet, Kun said the price didn't matter so much, because he invited her to dinner, and that's what matters. Chu observed that since he treated her to not so expensive a meal, he had another gift for her, and he excitedly hurried to ensure her monthly fee ahead of time. C replied that it wasn't necessary, and that it was worth following the rules. The editor offered another round, and a surprised Sonin agreed, seeing how much Ko could handle. They had another round each. After a while, they went outside, where Shu quickly said goodbye to Na, indicating he had enjoyed the night very much, exchanging different stories. He wished he could spend more time with her. Then the editor, embarrassed, quickly interrogated him. Zenin confirmed his intentions, as spending a good time with his editor is essential for his work. Agreed with him, saying it was also important for his work. Supposed that if they were to continue, it was better to do so now. Sheol was pleasantly surprised. The editor asked if he was ready for the third round, but this time she invites when he didn't know how to react to the offer, so he naturally agreed. Meanwhile, it was late as they strolled through the city streets at night, deciding to stop at the next bar, where they ordered more alcoholic drinks and continued their pleasant pastime, engaging in very interesting and enjoyable conversations between them. Nan noticed that this place had a pleasant atmosphere. Kung said they only go to this place after meeting special authors. Chu jokingly said that in that case, they had arrived at a forbidden place. En returned the smile after asking if she wanted another glass of beer. Kun kindly agreed. After a few minutes and a few shots, the editor Kung was already very drunk, claiming that all authors lack talent and demanding Senin's approval for everything. He didn't hold back, saying that everyone is deprived and only come to this world with their talents, and that C needs to understand this, whether or not it's of his interest. Exactly at this moment, Chu tried to tell him that she was extremely drunk, and that it was necessary to stop. Na refused, and then asked if he thought the editor was a creature he shouldn't get involved with. He said he didn't believe it, which was another reason for her to drink, which encouraged her to do so. After drinking a good amount of alcohol, Senin realized it was already late. Furthermore, the editor had drunk a lot, and something needed to be done. He noticed that now he was more relaxed. Ku had no idea how much he could drink. The editor began to guess his age, to which he didn't respond, saying he would turn 27 this year. Na was surprised, replying that he was already very old, to which Chu nodded. The editor thought about his age and said he would turn 26 this year, asking if he was her oppa. He looked confused and said that based on the age, it was so. Nan stated she was not to speak so formally with a girl just 1 year younger. She replied that she couldn't communicate with her editor otherwise, looking enigmatically. Na said it was allowed to disobey the chain of command, but in return, the editor asked permission to call her oppa. Suddenly, Kum started talking again, saying he was about to turn 26, also insisting on calling him oppa. Na literally fell on the bench, after which he began to get sleepy. Shaw realized that the editor could no longer continue the night, feeling extremely uncomfortable being called oppa even by a pretty girl like her. He hurriedly informed her, but Kun in turn ended up falling asleep. Realizing this was already a problem, Sanzanin hurried to wake her up, but it wasn't easy. He called her name for a few minutes, nudging her shoulder. However, a deep sleep kept her awake. Kun realized the last glass of beer was unnecessary. Not knowing what to do with the editor, Kay decided to take her outside where she began to play whimsically with the dog, swinging it in different directions. Chu made the only right decision, carrying her on his back to take her home. Kay had said that Oppa was good at drawing and would become an artist or cartoonist. Kun replied that drawing well is not enough to be an artist. Na said she would create her own publishing house where she would play the role of chief, publishing and promoting her work. Nan commented that she's looking forward to that moment. The cheerful editor Kung replied that he would undoubtedly do it for him, after which he murmured something inarticulate, his eyes heavy, and finally, Na fell silent, periodically opening her eyes, seeing only his neck in front of her, realizing he was carrying her in his arms as he was slowly falling into a deep sleep. Sun Zenin lifted her carefully and gently so as not to accidentally wake her, which she did not plan to do. She was calm and quite drunk. El Kun didn't care about anything. After a while, Na began to reluctantly open her eyes and then woke up, looking around. She suddenly found herself lying on the bed with no one around. She was perplexed because she remembered being at a bar with Chu recently. When she got out of bed, Na looked around again and realized she wasn't imagining it. She was indeed in her apartment, in her room. Kay began to remember the recent events, thinking she had returned home herself. After a few moments, Na remembered that Sanzanin had carried her on his back, and El Kun grimaced, realizing how embarrassed she had been in front of Kun, assuming he had indeed taken her to the room and put her to bed. En got up hastily from the bed, at which point the bedroom door opened. Kun was greatly startled to see Na in her house. The assistant Swang, who asked about Na's sleep. Duck said he thought the editor El Kun would sleep late unless she was pretending, which the assistant questioned. The astonished Na just murmured her name inaudibly, looking surprised. Sun said she received a call from Chin asking for help, saying that the editor had gotten drunk and forgotten her duties, and that she also had to help carry her to bed. Kay asked if she was really saying it that way, and Ducci replied that she was speaking generally, and that the facts were clear. Holding her head, Na said she had indeed drunk too much, finally showing her bad side, and Kung apologized. The assistant said that as long as she admitted it, there would be no problem, adding that from now on, as a professional, it was better not to embarrass herself. Na was perplexed to hear such a thing from the assistant Sonin Dux. Meanwhile, he remained extremely confident, looking into the eyes of the rebuker, and Kung, who was literally nervous, not understanding why. Sun was speaking to her like that. Na supposed she was deliberately provoking a fight because, as a normal assistant, she couldn't afford to say such things. Kung had to defend herself, not knowing something she hadn't even experienced with the editor-in-chief. He put on his glasses and said that Sue was a common assistant, but meddling in personal matters. Dux replied that it was a forced situation since he had to help Kun, saying that as a man, Zahn didn't want to enter the woman's room, so he called his student to help. Kay joked, saying she had sacrificed her personal time to help the manga author with a non-work-related matter. She then wondered if she was really working under Nama's direction to learn how to make manga. Svan replied monotonously that the editor Na was absolutely right, adding that she didn't work for Sony's sister just to become a manga author. Surprisingly, Kung asked what Dukes meant and who Nano Nama really was. She gave her a chance to answer, asking why she was under Kun's wing and what she was plotting. Suan, very worried, turned around and began to murmur something unintelligible, but said she was there to help Sonin in some way, even if it was for an important deed. Ducci still wanted her to succeed, so she was on her side. Editor Na asked why she had so much hope in Kunchu, and why she didn't try to become a better author than him. Swan replied that if it led to success, she would agree. But for now, she didn't need to become someone like that. asking if it was strange to want to help Han. Kung indignantly declared that all that was normal, and then continued calmly, saying their relationship should only be professional, even if they had a close relationship as a student and author, which made her think that Suan had absolutely no professional expectations. Na added that it seemed she was there to do her best, and that was not normal. After hearing that, Duchi's assistant calmly replied that, as she had said, it was the law of life. To get something, you needed to give something. She agreed with that opinion. Kum couldn't figure out the true intentions behind her union. The assistant kept saying that she had already gotten something from her a long time ago when she was going through a difficult time in her life. Sonin gave her what she needed back then, so now it was her turn to repay by helping in various ways. Na was very aware that something was clearly wrong with the assistant. She should have hurried to stop her. Suwon declared that she also had something to say about all this. Why were they talking about this? Saying that reading for her third round with the author she was responsible for was reckless drunkenness. Tandochi reminded Na once again of her shameful actions, asking if she had crossed the line, saying that reading for her third round with the author she was responsible for was reckless drunkenness. Tandochi reminded once again of her shameful actions, asking if she had crossed the line, stating that after all, she crossed the professional limits of the relationship between author and editor. It was as if her H was trying to embarrass the editor, which she did very well. After some manipulations, Na declared herself guilty, saying that the assistant was absolutely right, adding that she was not making excuses, but that for some days she had been in tune with Kun, and that was why she decided to get closer to him, to set things in motion. Dux thought he could improve his relationship through work. Zerhong wondered if he really needed to get close to Chu personally. Na literally exploded, saying that she was just an assistant who had no right to say such a thing. Author and editor are more than partners, sometimes closer than friends, and they might not be limited to a commercial relationship. The assistant replied that this relationship is more like between husband and wife. They are not like partners. The girls were on the verge of frenzy, and were not going to back down from their positions. And Kung realized that sometimes their commercial relationship is like a family relationship in a way, and reformulated to say that it should be due to the fact that they work and produce a good product, and Suan is just her apprentice who is refining the author's case and cannot handle these things. Kum did not stop attacking her, saying that above all, she was just a simple assistant and should not interfere in the affairs of the author and the editor, because she had no such authority, noting that Dux was venting about his professional status and overstepping his boundaries. But it is Suan, after all, who literally gives Sansen in his heart in a more personal way. The assistant was stunned by this statement from the editor and even started to stammer, stating that he couldn't say such things because En saved her with his works, and to her, he is a saint who rises above others like a god. It is blasphemy on the part of editor Kung to say this, and besides, her personal life is her own business. Na apologized, saying she had made a mistake, and the girls calmed down for a while, after which the editor reminded her once again that she was just Chu's assistant and had to behave accordingly while doing her job, especially if she wanted to help Kun. And the editor is the one who can help the author the most. Kun adjusted his glasses. Furthermore, Sisney should not pry into her relationship with Sonin without reason, thus embarrassing. Duck said it seemed that Na wanted to cross the line and that the assistant should not get involved. Han Kung responded that apparently he never thought about misunderstandings between people since Zong is just a student. The assistant caught the hint that a boy and a girl should not sit together after the age of 7, and Na took advantage of her position to get close to a man without being useful to the author like a gold digger. The editor tried to deny it. The assistant said she was Sonin's only student. Na declared that Suan was not helpful because she had recently reviewed his work. The assistant replied that even Shu acknowledges the improvement in his work since she arrived and that she has been helping, and it is because of this skill that she stays with him. The girls were extremely irritated. The next day, assistant Suan went to Sonin's house where she obsessively asked him to tell her everything he knew about manga and to teach her. Kun, in turn, was surprised by such an unexpected decision. The assistant asked him to teach her to draw and everything that could help him. Chu replied that she was there to learn manga production, and he would tell her everything, although he had not asked him to train her. It all depended on the schedule's approval, after which she would have to help him. C asked if she had learned to use the program they had talked about earlier, to which Swan replied affirmatively. Chu continued, saying that in that case, she needed to sit in front of the computer, then began to update the assistant little by little, telling her exactly what she should do. He asked her to give 2 layers as it was necessary for the background color to be available. Then, it would be necessary to enlarge and copy, and only then try to rotate. Senin noticed that she was doing quite well. After a while, Kun said that she had learned the program's tools very well, almost to a level of mastery. He did not expect Suwon to be able to learn even functions that he did not know. She responded, trying to adjust to his instructions. Chu added that she was talented at quickly adapting to a new job, which was little less than Duke nodded with a smile. Nan said that her abilities to learn and understand new concepts were better than he imagined. Then Senin. She summarized by saying that she had no right to draw a manga at all. Sam asked that she not be fired for it because she wanted to help with it. She responded that she would not fire her at all, and asked her to help with the channel since it was a colored manga and a colored background was necessary. DCE declared cheerfully that there would be no problems with the channels and layers. Chu thought she's not human. She's a computer. C9 pointed out that serialization would be in 15 days, so they would work together, even if they had manuscripts. So all these existences will be exhausted when serialization starts, and the goal is to finish 16 pages by Friday. He didn't say if he could help on Thursday or Friday night. Suwon asked if he was referring to overtime. He replied affirmatively, but said he couldn't guarantee the feather coloring work before the deadline, so they would have to work hard, and depending on the situation, maybe even pull an all-nighter. Dulcie said it was not a problem, and that she could help with the manuscripts for 3 consecutive nights if necessary, as she had a lot of energy. Seinen realized that maybe there were no more people like her, and suddenly started saying something inaudible, then continued saying that a woman shouldn't sleep in a man's studio. Suwon stated that there would be no problem since he is like a god to his disciple, and there are no barriers between the disciple and the god. She asked to let her help. Chu realized that her defenses were impenetrable, and she was very eager to help, so he decided to take a risk and put her to work. Seinen smiled and said that in that case, it was okay to stay late today. Suwon was happy, and we suggested she initially have a good dinner and order food, asking what she wanted to eat. However, DCE stated that most takeout food alters her nutritional balance because it's composed of carbohydrates and is bad for digestion. She asked for permission to cook something. Seinen asked what she wanted to cook. Suwon replied dinner. Kum asked if she was going to cook for both of them. DCE said this option was much cheaper, and if they had to work late in the future, they would prefer to cook rather than order food. She asked if she needed to go shopping. Chu replied that he had some ingredients, and then wondered if there would be any problem cooking something that would be an issue for her boyfriend, assuming he would be angry to hear that Suwon was cooking for another man. Dulcie laughed, saying it was fine for her, and that he didn't need to worry so much because she actually didn't have a boyfriend. Even if she did, it didn't matter. A few minutes later, Sunun Waki went to the grocery store. There she started selecting products diligently based solely on her taste. At that moment, Mingi's assistant met her at one of the shelves and asked if President Hua knew how to cook. San replied affirmatively because she had lived alone for a while. Mi asked when she had had that period. Duxie replied it was about 6 years ago, trying to convince the assistant that she still had an idea of cooking and could handle simple dishes. But she got very upset when the president appeared before her with a different image, realizing that assistants usually don't cook. Joel looked at it and returned the smile. Then Mi replied that it was obvious, since Kay was busy with his work, and that, consequently, she would attend the dinner. The assistants must also be busy with work and eating due to the workload. S said that there is little she can do to help her, especially when it comes to the author's work. So she does the best she can. However, the assistant Mi cannot accept the fact that Joan has changed a lot, and is now cooking food for Sonin, which is very strange since he is a man, stating that a woman should not pamper a man like that without having a special relationship with him. Suwon was surprised and pointed out that if she had a girlfriend, she clearly wouldn't be delighted. Du didn't want to believe that he could have a woman. She said that the assistant was just hypothetical, after which, extremely insecure, she began to speak, reminding him of the situation as a whole. In her opinion, President Yoa has been pretending to be an assistant and is really enjoying what's happening. Sam tried to contest her statement, but Mi realized that she even seemed happier. Dux basically said that she likes shopping, something that Ji hadn't noticed before. Mi walked away with resentment and declared that she didn't dare distract from such important shopping. The president felt equally offended by her assistant, chose to remain silent. Then Steele said that Kun could withdraw, and went on to continue walking around the store. The supervisor, Mi, said with a sad voice that she wanted to warn her as a precaution about how she isn't sure what value or pleasure her home gets from spending time with Nankung. Sooner or later, she will have to return and become President Sanju again. Dochi, in turn, said sadly that she understood adding that it was just a short vacation they granted her, and that it wasn't like she was a teenager. Only Hong addressed the supervisor of Kanoni and asked her if she thought she was incapable of separating her professional life from her personal life. Assistant Min, in turn, looked sadly into her eyes and decided not to answer the question. Sanhua gave her the same look and turned to the shelves after staying silent. Chikon apologized to her for overstepping her boundaries. Dux asked for help with shopping, saying it wasn't that bad. They went shopping together. President Suan approached the vegetable counter and began choosing large carrots. Assistant Mi followed Jo silently, helping her pick good products. Dux found the moment and the situation she was in quite funny. After some time, Suan returned to Sansanen's house with groceries, and then they started preparing dinner. Zol enthusiastically declared that the pasta looked quite appetizing. Dux said that when she lived alone, she used to make her own pasta, but she didn't know if he would like it. Nan replied that he was tired of eating out, so he thanked her very much for the dinner and urged her to eat quickly so they could start with the manuscript. Sonin agreed kindly, and they began to have dinner. Kun ate quite quickly, which surprised her. He was literally devouring food without order at the table. Dux was so surprised by how fast he was eating that she forgot to eat herself, while Sonin had already finished his dinner and was drinking some water. After thanking her for the perfectly cooked pasta, she asked again if he was sure he had finished eating. Zol said he needed to finish the touches on the painting so she could take her time. Eat in peace after a while. A tired President Joa finally got home. She had to work all night and couldn't return until morning. At that moment, Jay's assistant brought her tea and herbs before going to bed. S told him she needed to rest and come back in 3 minutes, suggested it would be more efficient to work during the day and tire at night, since yesterday was the deadline for her weekly project. Dux replied that everything would fall apart if they missed the deadline with the serialization of the manuscripts, that TM stock becoming something real conjectured with Ines Sony every week on the night before the deadline. Sun said he didn't know because they finished quickly since they had a plan, but from the moment of serialization, they would have to work hard to start from scratch and gain even more momentum. M's assistant observed that working with manga was not as easy as he thought, and Yoa literally fell asleep in her chair. Assistant G asked if something was worrying her. The president said not much, but something K did not react at all. And the delicious father wondered with the president. Sunam asked M if that was good or bad. Com suggested that it was actually not that important, with which Juan did not agree, stating that this way he would know his food preferences and whether or not to change things. Jot replied that these questions should be asked to his wife, and in his case he was just grateful S was outlining the importance of the moment, saying that it could directly affect Kun's health, but at that moment he couldn't think clearly, so it was necessary to go to sleep. But after taking a bath, the assistant agreed, realizing the state Joa was in. She hurried to the bathroom where she took a relaxing bath. She had not yet recovered from that uncomfortable question. And S was mentally reviewing the dinner situation. In the end, concluded that the pasta should have been served with cream instead of olive oil. A week later, Dux collaborated with Enna at her house. Chu asked if the pages of the 6th and 8th covers were ready to be worked on. A tired Saman replied that they would be done in the next 10 minutes. Kun stated that he would finish the background work, asking him to continue until page 16. And then
Dux accepted it cordially, but realized that at this rate, she would soon run out of strength. She had imagined things differently, and here, 16 pages in 1 week. S was tired. Such work seemed to drain all her energy. They worked 3 nights in a row, and she wanted to sleep while a concentrated Sin worked quietly on the manuscript. Nan decided to see how Dux's assistant was doing, and taking a look, asked if the work was difficult for her. Saman replied that she was fine and did not find it difficult at all. Kay pointed out that this was her first approved calendar with deadlines, and as such, understood exactly how tired she was. After all, 16 pages in a week is a lot. Chu said it was also his fault since he was not used to the chapters and would try to adapt more quickly, increasing his productivity. Sansenen suggested that today they should order burgers at home because they didn't have time for anything. San said she could cook a simple dish, but it matched negatively. She observed him working hard on the manuscripts and then tried to change his mind after all, saying she was worried about his health and neglecting his diet and sleep could have irreversible consequences. After all, if he had eaten and slept well, he would have been able to do a better job, with which Sanin completely agreed, saying that adhering to the regimen was the best they could do. Moreover, it means producing work that ultimately sells well. S couldn't understand, and for a moment even got distracted thinking about the desire to swim in the pool, adding that she might be making money doing what she likes. But how would her readers feel? They pay the money they earned with difficulty in exchange for their free time and all their desires, going through deprivations. In other words, people don't give their life and their money is the reward given in exchange for sacrificing that very life. And that's exactly what they are paying him to create, which means the author is obliged to give his best since they are paying so much for it. Therefore, he must show that his work is good enough to give his life for it, conventionally speaking. So he can't help but put it into his work. It's a bit shameful to even call it work, because any worthy brand he must create content polished by his sincerity, even being a third-rate writer. He added that as a professional, he could never refuse this kind of work. At that moment, Sunan realized that he was probably already stressing Swan with his sermons. She, in turn, looked at him with a smile and said, "You are boring me," and she was partly right. San, in turn, reflected on his words. Earning money is like earning someone's life. This seemed funny to him, and he smiled. Sanzanin realized he had come to thank him for his help, but it's exactly those who leave after learning something valuable. Meanwhile, in the newsroom where he worked, his workday was in full swing. He had been working hard on several projects with the sweat of his brow. Meanwhile, in the newsroom where he worked, his workday was in full swing. He had been working hard on several projects with the sweat of his brow, but at that moment, the editor-in-chief approached and asked if the publication was tomorrow, that new work by Nan Kun Shu. And how was progressing with this project. The editor Kung said proudly that this time was full of confidence. He smiled and replied that he would look forward to the next day. The editor Kung hurried to visit his author Sam Zenin. When he arrived at his house, he found the assistant preparing to serve him tea, and the Kung declined his services, saying he would do it himself, thanked Chu for the work, and said that he had received the last 10 chapters of the manuscript for its serialized publication upon verifying that both had done a good job. Duke Sim smiled, adding that he could not call it a reward for all their efforts. But still, the advertising banner was ready for his new series, A Roof 3 People. S. Zenin asked if this beautiful banner was the main one. Na replied affirmatively, saying he had another one that would be next. In addition, once the serialization reached 20 chapters, he would publish an announcement within a month regarding social networks. Kun said he could take care of it. Sun asked if advertising on networks was common. Na replied that the cost of advertising ranged between 500,000 and 3 million. Na noted that with the announcement, they would be able to attract about 10,000 new readers, thanks to whom they would gain popularity. Dochi agreed with them. Then editor Kung suggested they go out instead of staying since the deadline had been successfully met, and they could celebrate with a party, adding a very important detail that this event would be financed by the company, which did not please Gua very much, but still they were going out for a walk. They decided to go to the pool to relax as they deserved. The girls descended the calm waters where they began to rest from work. The editor asked Sun if the work was so hard. Duchi replied that yes. Kung said that he noticed the assistant's good resistance, asked how she felt after finishing the work. Juan replied that he had a tighter deadline to go as far as possible. Na, surprised, said that this reassured him a lot, then thanked Sungsi for the work. As Chu said many times that her presence helped in many things, also said that she had a talent for design and that if she had the opportunity, she would like to see her work. Zong said he would make sure to show it to her. Kay mentioned cooking for Kun, and Joa also cooked dinner for her. From time to time, the editor said that apparently her cooking was not so good, asking to improve her culinary skills so as not to have to receive her at the door with food coming out. Z replied playfully that she would do her best to impress her, then sincerely thanked Assistant Swan for everything she had done, adding that Nchu probably would not have been able to meet such a deadline without her calling Dochi Mana from heaven. Jua, in turn, was pleasantly surprised by such a frank conversation with the editor. Na realized that Kung smiled at her genuinely. Sun decided to reciprocate and returned the smile, saying she was equally grateful. Meanwhile, S. Zenin was in a separate sauna, where he was really enjoying himself. When he left, he took a dip in the refreshing pool water. Thinking that starting with a sauna was not a bad idea, as expected, the editor knew how to relax. Suddenly wondered how they spent time together and if everything was going well. At that moment, Sonin turned his attention to red water from the tank. Without noticing what was happening, assumed that her nose was bleeding. Kun wiped it for her. making sure she was okay. After a while, Ed and Wall were waiting at the exit, and Kun filled her with compliments, saying that he already considered her attractive, but seeing her after the bath made her even more beautiful. Swan, in turn, modestly said that everyone looked better after bathing, deciding to reciprocate. Jua commented that Kun had stunning skin. The editor said confidently that she was still very young. After that, she was worried about Sun Sinan because they had arranged to meet him at that place, but he was not there yet. They started laughing, joking about whether he had fainted and couldn't get up. At that moment, some doctors with a stretcher ran past them, saying they needed to pass urgently. They then asked the sauna worker where the patient who had fainted was. The employee replied that they had placed him on a bench under a fan. The girls looked at each other, knowing very well that he had indeed fainted and it was no longer funny. Immediately, they ran towards him, shouting his name. In parallel, after some time, Sun Sinan was taken to the nearest hospital while connected to the machine. Nan Kung lay in a hospital bed and looked at a worried Swan who was literally shocked by the result of their sauna visit. She suggested she go home because she also needed to rest, saying that he was fine. However, Dai refused, saying she wasn't going anywhere until the test results arrived. She said it was unnecessary, adding that it was due to overwork and lack of sleep and nothing to worry about. Swan insisted he not be so calm and not take health problems lightly, but a blood test would tell all. Meanwhile, in the newsroom, Naguam continued working hard. Suddenly, the chief editor, who was clearly perplexed about something, approached. She didn't pay attention until she felt someone standing beside her. He asked about the progress of Kun Chu's work that came out yesterday, and if everything was going as planned. The editor and Kung remained silent for a few seconds. Then she finally replied that the daily statistics showed a figure of 80,000. He thought it wasn't enough and sadly asked if that was all. Editor Na said it wasn't at all. The chief editor was very surprised that Kung thought it was a huge amount. He said it was the first day, the first 24 hours shouldn't be counted, and 14 hours in total had been counted, with a mixed male and female audience ratio of 51 to 49. Additionally, we have to consider the 2-day statistics, adding that daily sales could even exceed 20 million W. The chief editor was literally speechless, looking at her with surprised eyes. He then pointed out that if these results were maintained at a similar level, the series could be a great success. He asked her to print this graph and give it to him. Na kindly agreed. The chief editor demanded that everyone gather because they were about to start the advertising conference at that very moment. Meanwhile, at the hospital where Zenin was still with Sul, the doctor said that the levels of hemoglobin higher than normal. Mayan asked what hemoglobin was, and Guan did not know what it was about. The doctor tried to find the right words to explain it in an accessible way, then said that the red blood cell count was at a high level. Sonin exhaled in relief and hurried to give his version of the incident. Wondering if it was due to overexertion, Juan was not sure, but did not continue guessing, saying it could have been due to his midnight snack and asking if he needed medication. In turn, Swan asked the doctor what this elevated red blood cell count meant. The doctor said, a little unsure, that in a few words, his blood was thick. Kun replied indignantly that probably everyone's blood was like that. But the doctor had another opinion and said that he would have to be examined at the main hospital for more details. The doctor insisted that he should not go to the university hospital and that enro would write a recommendation, convincing Zenin to have an examination in the next 3 days. After some time walking through the city streets, he did not feel frustrated. Swan asked him to take a day off work, even if it was just for 1 day, but Kun refused, claiming that today he had to publish a comic. Chu said he should go home and rest because he could publish the announcement tomorrow and he would finish his work in the meantime. Dux said he should tell the editor about the results of his tests, but Na did not take it seriously. Juan might change his mind since he had worked hard and his body was reacting like this, adding that he would go back to the studio to work anyway. Kay said goodbye to S and Chu until the morning, not understanding why Sonin was so stubborn and did not pay proper attention to his health. Swan watched him in silence. in a state of extreme concern. After a few moments, Dux finally returned home, where he was greeted by the assistant with. He began to read the content of Chu's test results. After reading it, Juan did not understand very well what the real issue was. Diseases were notified in which the red blood cell count does not normalize and increases the probability of blood clotting. Saman asked me if there was any treatment available for the disease. Without news, he suggested it could be blood cancer. The assistant G declared sadly that this could be true. Swan continued reading that bloodletting could be done or cancer pills could be taken, but in fact, the disease is incurable. Min said the prognosis is better than other deadly cancers, but in most cases, patients usually live between 5 and 10 years. President Sunduk felt bad at that moment, realizing what could be expected for Sansan in the future, who, for some unknown reason, was so irresponsible with his own health. Advisor K pointed out that this is understood in the best cases, while 30% of patients end up being diagnosed with leukemia, which is a terrible disease. Suan refused to believe it contained cancer. He told me that this would be clear after a complete examination. Until then, we should not jump to conclusions and should not continue analyzing his bone marrow. Jua asked if this examination could be done with a simple method. He answered negatively. Jot added that he should be hospitalized and that the process of collecting materials is one of the most painful tasks. The president, Sor, realized that this came at a very bad time since he had just started publishing a comic. Didn't know what to do because he needed to suspend the entire workflow at that moment. The editor, Na, suddenly arrived at S's house, intending to visit him. Chu, on the other hand, could not afford to step away from work even for a moment. Na called his apartment and asked if he was home, but no one answered. Then he started knocking on the door and shouting his name loudly. After that, Na realized he was regretting the situation. The main door was open and entered. When not seeing anyone, Kyun carefully made his way to his room. When he opened the door, he called out, but it was as if Sion Snim didn't hear him. He was sitting at his computer, looking at the monitor screen. The editor, Na, entered the room and asked for permission to turn on the light. A sepulchral silence ensued, and Kyung hurried to turn on the light, but Cheol continued to stare at the screen. He still didn't move. She got nervous. Na started calling him again, but he kept ignoring her. The editor began to slowly approach him from behind, saying that it was her who had come to see him, then suddenly decided to give him a nudge on the shoulder, and Kun emitted an unmistakable sniffing sound. Kyun was really glad that he had only fallen asleep, and that he was actually okay. A couple of minutes later, a sleepy Sun Senim was smoking quietly on his balcony. Na said that she was very scared because she didn't know what to think anymore. She couldn't understand how he could sleep in that position. Nam replied that he had accidentally fallen asleep while browsing the internet, noting that this skill is usually taught in the army. Kung said that his oppa has a strange characteristic. He sleeps with his eyes open. Then Na wondered what he was looking for on the internet because he should have gone to bed. Sun Senim chose to remain silent and not answer her question, which seemed extremely strange to her after he said he was not looking for anything important, and a Kung naturally didn't believe him. Chu asked what she was doing at his house at that time, since they didn't have any meetings scheduled for today. Na hurried to tell him that she had good news for him, that was why she had come. Kyung began rummaging through her bag and said that the series 3 Under the Roof had broken all records in 3 days. She showed him the statistics, saying that their daily sales exceeded 10 million WS. Sonim was perplexed. He didn't know how to react in such a situation and for a while couldn't believe what was happening. Na was worried, saying that usually after such information the author reacts somewhat differently. Kyun reiterated the previous, saying that these are amazing results. Cheol was really pleased, replied that he couldn't find the words because he was so surprised by such an incredible result. Na stated that the audience was made up of men and women and that he shouldn't relax now after all. This is really remarkable progress. He scratched his head. Sonim didn't know how to tell her everything that had happened in the hospital. Then he composed himself, said that there was a small matter. The editor, Na, started to smile at him. Kun says he realizes how little time has passed and sincerely apologizes. Kung thought he wanted a raise. I asked about it because with such a result, he probably expected a large advance. Nam said it wasn't about money. The editor's and Kung's face was already beginning to change, assuming that the news wouldn't be pleasant. Sun Senim kept saying that he wanted to put his series on hold, asking how feasible that was. Na was so shocked by the information she heard that she couldn't say a word. Sun Senim was equally sad, realizing that he had to ask for a leave of absence. Kyun asked sadly, "Does that mean you want to take a break now when things are starting to get better?" The editor, Na, suddenly laughed, asking if he was joking. Assuming it was because of the good results, she asked him not to joke like that as it could give her a heart attack, but Kun didn't find it funny. Sun Senim realized that taking a break would be extremely difficult, and so let the editor know. Didn't realize that he actually wasn't joking, and he became sad again in front of her eyes. Chul tried to make her change her mind to give her a break. Literally for one chapter, after all, he has a bunch of draft selections saved in reserve that could serve as a kind of safety net. But a frustrated Kung replies that they don't have the option to stop right now. It hasn't even been a month, and he's already tired. The writing team has worked hard to achieve these results, and right now, they're at a stage where they can't give up. They have to increase the audience at all costs. Na became obsessive and declared that even if he had a terminal illness, he had the obligation to keep working. Sun Senim thought for a moment and told him that he was probably right and to keep trying. At that moment, he realized that perhaps he had guessed right. The editor, Na, asked if he was really sick. Cheolkunen hurried to reassure her by telling her that it wasn't like that at all. Inam isn't seriously ill, but he recently received the results of a physical exam. They weren't satisfactory, and he was told not to exert himself too much. Ayun replies that if it's about overwork, she suffers from it too. She said she was making money in her favorite business, and that she shouldn't ask for a break just because of a diagnosis. It's better to think about healthy eating, and she adds that she hopes not to talk about the subject again. Na asked her to be patient for 3 months, after which they would try to grant her a leave, citing several famous authors who haven't had vacations in 10 years to make the argument. Sun Zanim sadly said that she understood and wouldn't take a break, realizing how reckless she could have been. Na got excited and started talking to her again about his incredible success and the fabulous statistics figures. After a while, they discussed all the points, and Chol kept working. While he was busy painting the characters, Swan approached him, stayed close, and watched his talented sketches. Jua then pointed out that he shouldn't be working so hard. Kun pretended as if he didn't know what she was talking about. Sunduk reminded him that he should undergo a full exam at the hospital. We were told that he had decided to postpone the exam because those tests didn't mean he was mortal. He also wants to improve his health so that the exam shows that there's nothing wrong with him. Sun didn't understand how he could ignore something like that. Insisted that they examine him, asking him to stop just 1 chapter to make sure he was okay. At that moment, Sonim suddenly got angry, shouting her name and looking at her threateningly. We were told that a student can't tell his teacher what to do, especially in matters like this, and he had already told her that the author worked at the expense of her health, and rightly so. And when a professional announces a break, he is automatically downgraded in the eyes of his readers. Kun asked her to stop judging the subject and get straight to work, but the unstoppable Sunun asked if he had told his condition to the client. Sun Zinim decided to remain silent for a few seconds and still replied that this issue was closed and that he wasn't going to take a break. Jua looked at her sadly. And that's how we wrap up this video. If you liked it, leave your like. If you want a continuation, leave your comment below, and remember, it's very good that the lazy soul wants everything but achieves nothing.